So welcome to Tara Institute. My name's Damien, and this month in this introductory class, I have been talking about a description of Buddhism that I heard from the Dalai Lama, but I'm not sure if it came from the Dalai Lama or it might be something that the Buddha had said himself. But that the practice of Buddhism, or the practice of a Buddhist, is loving kindness, developing loving kindness. And the view, let's say the philosophical view or the view of reality, is one of dependent origination. So we've been talking about this a little bit in the last few weeks. And just, often when people hear they first encounter Buddhism, they think that Buddhism is obsessed with suffering, because we have, the 8 types of suffering of this and the 6 types of suffering of that, and the three basic forms of suffering, the truth of suffering. So we have all this sort of apparent emphasis on suffering. So I hope in the last few weeks, talking about loving kindness, and loving kindness really means the practice of love and compassion, that rather than Buddhism being obsessed with suffering, I'd be more inclined to say that Buddhism is obsessed with loving kindness, or more obsessed with love and compassion. And so one of the points that I've been trying to convey is that we human beings have a tendency towards altruism, and altruism is actually it's mandatory for us to survive childhood. We have to have the altruism of others to enable us to live even one day after being born. It's only due to the kindness of others that we survive even one day. So altruism and kindness and warm-hearted affection are natural to being a human being. And I think that's something to try to understand about yourself, that there is a natural tendency for love and compassion within us. And so when we have a warm-hearted affection towards somebody, that warm-hearted affection is expressed as care and concern for that person. And so our care and concern is such that we see this person that we care for and we think they lack happiness. They want happiness, but they lack happiness. And so we endeavour to make this person that we care for so deeply, we endeavour to make them happy. And similarly, when we observe and we see that they're suffering, we have this spontaneous wish, based on our affection for them, that we wish or we want them to be free of that suffering, and so we have compassion for the person, wanting them to be free of the suffering that we observe. So that's the expression of our loving kindness, based on an affection for somebody, that because of that affection and because of our care and concern, we have the wish that they be happy and the wish that they be free from suffering. And so you could say that a lot of the Buddhist teachings are trying to identify what is the happiness that person lacks. What is the happiness that person is lacking? So we often approach it in a very simplistic way. We think the happiness that they're lacking is food, or the happiness that they're lacking is some money, or the happiness that they're lacking is a hug. But the teachings of the Buddha, in a way, I'm asserting that the teachings of the Buddha are trying to show us that there are more extensive happinesses that we lack. You know, the happiness of a safe and peaceful future, the happiness of a good rebirth in the future, the happiness of a contented mind, and the happiness of being free of all of the delusions. You know, these are happinesses that we are also able to have. And so when we have that warm-hearted affection for somebody, instead of just wishing that they get their cappuccino straight away, we can also wish that they have, you know, more extensive happinesses. And from a Buddhist point of view, we can say, you know, that you wish for them to have the happiness of a good rebirth, the happiness of a peaceful and calm death with a good mind at the time of death, the happiness of a good rebirth, the happiness of developing the wisdom and knowledge required to actually break free of cyclic existence. You know, so we can actually wish that happiness for somebody. And similarly, with compassion, we can wish that they be free of their immediate suffering of a sore knee or a stomach upset or a headache. You know, we can wish them to be free of that suffering with a genuine warmth and affection. But also, we can wish that they be free of negativity, that they can be free of the consequences of previous negative actions, that they can be free of the ignorance that continues to manipulate their emotions so that they continue to create negative actions and prolong this cycle of suffering endlessly. So we can wish that they be free of that suffering. We can wish that they be free of the suffering of being trapped in cyclic existence, being subject to self-cherishing mind, and being subject to ignorance, because they are also elements of our suffering. So, you know, I've caged this description talking about somebody else. You know, we're looking at somebody else, and we're trying to develop our love and compassion for them, combined with a wisdom really understanding their circumstance. So if we really understand somebody's circumstance, we can have love and affection and express love and compassion for somebody in a much broader and deeper way. So that I think is something that we can use as a viewpoint for understanding what the Buddha taught. You know, and so in that process, I think it's pretty clear that all of this applies to yourself as well. So when, you know, I'm putting it in these terms of looking at somebody else and thinking all these things, but the reality is all of this applies to me as well. You know, this is the happiness that I lack, and the suffering that I am experiencing. And so there is this commonality between myself and everybody else, in that we are equal in lacking happiness and being subject to suffering. And we are equal in wanting to be happy and wanting to be free from suffering. And so this is an understanding or a point that we can come back to all of the time, really to understand and reinforce within us that in the same way that I want to be happy and I want to be free from suffering, equally everybody else also wishes to be happy and wishes to be free from suffering. And the Buddhist expression of love and compassion is similar in feeling to my ordinary expression of love and compassion, except for the fact that my ordinary love and compassion that I feel for somebody and the care and concern that I feel for somebody is often conditional, and it's sort of based on a favoritism or some sort of a little bit of self-interest. And out of my self-interest, I have this collection of people that I do care for. They could be relatives, partner, friend, boss, whatever. We have a conditional sort of grouping. And the aspiration from the Buddhist side is to have love and affection for others in an unconditional manner. Not qualified by any sort of self-interest from my side. And so on that basis then it can be universal. It can be completely universal and extensive. Whereas our conditional love and affection is narrow and it's specific, and it might be temporary because it's based on some thinking or some feeling within myself. And when that thinking or that feeling changes, then I abandon people from my sphere of care and concern. And due to my self-interest, I pull in somebody else into my sphere of the ones that I care for and are concerned for. So it's a very personal and conditional love and affection that I show to others. But the Buddhist aspiration is to be able to put aside your own self-interest and try to generate love and compassion in an unconditional and universal manner. And we then talked a little bit about, this month I haven't really talked much about the dependent arising aspect. I spoke a little bit last week, and the sort of the thinking that we did last week we'll repeat again tonight. But it is a very complicated topic, and it's something that needs to be studied and thought about over a long period of time. So if the concept of it seems a bit bizarre or a bit mysterious, you can just put it to the side and gradually deepen your understanding by reading and thinking about it over a long period of time. So, as I was saying last week, so the types of dependent arising, there's a dependent arising of cause and effect, and we've spoken a little bit about that. And so again, we can think about the suffering of somebody and the lack of happiness. So both the lack of happiness and the suffering of somebody, we can directly attribute that to not understanding cause and effect. That because a person is not following cause and effect, they lack happiness. They want happiness, but they haven't created the causes for happiness, and therefore they don't have happiness because they haven't created the causes. And similarly, they have suffering, they don't want suffering, but they've created the causes for suffering, and hence suffering is inevitable because you've created the causes for suffering. So the lack of understanding of cause and effect is really the biggest contributor to our lack of happiness and our experience of suffering. Because although we want happiness, as Shantideva says, although we want happiness, we shun the causes of happiness as though it's a poison. And although we don't want suffering, we embrace the causes of suffering as though it's a pleasure. And that's because we lack the understanding or a faith or a trust in cause and effect. Or we lack a knowledge of how cause and effect works. And so the very first teaching of the Buddha, which is referred to as the Four Noble Truths, given at Sarnath in India, the very first teaching, he says, this is the reality of your life. It is unsatisfactory. There is a truth of the unsatisfactoriness of your life. But that unsatisfactoriness actually has a cause. So the cause is a combination of previous action and the consequences of your previous action and your mental delusions. So they're the two main causes for the unsatisfactory experience that we have in life. So that's referred to often as the truth of suffering and the truth of the causes of suffering. So the first two of the Four Noble Truths. So the first type of dependent arising is this idea of cause and effect. If we understand the truth of the cause and effect and we live by it, then we can work towards being happy, and we can work towards being free of suffering in all of its aspects. So the second type of dependent arising is an object is actually dependent on its parts. And so you might think this is sort of like a frivolous or a meaningless example, but the underlying problem that we suffer from is that when we perceive everything in the world and we perceive other people and we have a conception or a perception of ourselves, that perception of everything that we see and everything that we experience and everything that we think is characterized by appearing independent, to exist independently, to exist as something very discrete and solid, singular, and an independent, like self-existent phenomena. So the example that I used is this one that I prepared earlier, we can say, so which is the table, this table. So what I'd like you to do is just perceive the table. Perceive the table. And look in your mind at how you are seeing the table. Like, how is it? In what manner are you actually perceiving the table? Like, how does it appear to you? Solid? All right, I'm going to say a few key words. It's itself. The table that's a table. And there it is. It's absolutely a table. Absolutely. There's no question in your mind that the identity, this thing that you're seeing, we'll just use the visual consciousness initially. So this thing that you're seeing is a table. Absolutely, it's a table. And so you have a definiteness that the table is there, and that if somebody says to you, what are the limits or the mode of existence of the table, you might say something like the quality of table pervades every single atom of the table. The identity of the table goes from the front to the back, from the left to the right, from the top to the bottom. Every aspect of that is table. Would you agree with that? No, is that, I'm putting these words in your mouth, but is that what this is doing something we probably have never done before, to think, how is it that I actually perceive the table? Like, what am I seeing when I perceive the table? And I think what I see is absolutely, it's a table. Okay? So, and the point is that that's the way everything appears to us without analysis, without analysing. I see this person. Absolutely, the way that person appears to me is the person, as it, no question. The way you see me is like with an absoluteness of there's this person talking at me, that's it. An identity, you can call it an identity, and there's a certainty that identity, the identity of the table, is there. Absolute certainty we have. So then, if we start to analyse it, so we're going to analyse it by thinking of its parts. So we see there's some red paint, and underneath it there's actually some black paint. There's a couple of boards here that have been glued together that have come from a tree some 100 years ago or something. And there's a bunch of legs that have been fashioned by somebody and cut and polished and shaped. And there's a whole bunch of screws and a couple of nails by the look of it. And a few pegs have been put in to hold it all together. And so there's different shapes and there's different dimensions. It's low, it's wide, it's breadth. There's a whole lot of characteristics. So when we look at the parts, and you look at all the parts, you can't find the table. Do you agree with that? When you look at the parts, when you're looking at all the parts and you see the parts, where is the table? Okay, so under analysis, and that's an important term, under analysis, looking at the parts upon which constitute the table, or which the table possesses, whichever, you can use whatever language you like, that the table possesses the parts, or the table is constituted of the parts, whatever language you want to use. But when you look at the parts, the table is not visible. So what we then say is that the table is dependent arising on the basis of its parts. So we can happily say that the table is there, but it's dependent arising on the basis of its parts. But if you look at the parts, you cannot see the table. And so you think, what's the benefit of this analysis? What is the benefit of this analysis? And the reason that we do this, so this applies to the dependent arising in terms of the causes, the dependent arising in terms of the parts, and the dependent arising in terms of mere label. So it's a very interesting thing, because when we look at something, we're absolutely certain that the thing is there. But when we analyse on the basis of the parts, we cannot find the table, which is a very interesting sort of quandary. But we would still say the table is there because it's a dependent arising on the basis of its parts. And so it's actually my mind is a key ingredient here in the identity of the table. It's my mind that is cognising the table on the basis of its parts. Okay, so why would we analyse like this? And the reason is that our emotions in terms of seeing friend or enemy or stranger, our emotions in terms of seeing my book, my car, my house, my friend, you know, my emotions in terms of hating somebody and lusting after somebody else, my emotions in terms of pride and arrogance and everything else are based on seeing things existing in a very concrete and definite way. You know, if you think about the way you see an enemy, the eneminess of that person completely pervades every aspect of that person at the moment that I am angry and I see the person as an enemy. At that moment, the eneminess of the enemy completely pervades my perception of that person. So even though they have other characteristics, you know, they have other qualities, that even historically they may have actually been very beneficial to me and maybe treated me very well in the past, but at this moment of my anger, the eneminess of that enemy is totally pervasive. And my mind is saying, that is the enemy there. That the identity of the enemy is absolute and it's there. Right? So if we're able to recollect this analysis of being based on the parts or being based on the components, we can see that that definiteness is mistaken. And so that's a very key point to understand, that our perception of things as being so definite and real and absolute is mistaken because it's excluding the actual reality of the person or the object. And so the point about dependent arising is that dependent arising will be the mechanism by which we completely can undermine our negative emotions and our negative actions. So this is something really to think about and to read. You know, it's something that requires some study. Oh, gee, this table's heavy. You know, there is a reality. There is a reality. This is not denying reality, but it's understanding how a reality exists. So maybe we should just sit in silence and think about this for a minute or two, and then we'll do some meditation. So we can just think about that example. You can mentally just go over that example, look at the table, then analyse the way that it's composed of parts, and just for a minute, just think about that situation. So let's do some breathing meditation. Is there anybody here for the very first time tonight? One? No? Good. Welcome. So it's a bit of a barrage tonight, but I hope you'll survive it. New ideas. So with the meditation, so we'll do a breathing meditation. And we're choosing to focus on the breath. And in that process of focusing on the breath, basically for the few minutes that we're focusing on the breath, we are actually banishing any negative minds that we might have. So for that due to the focus on the breath, we are freeing ourselves of any anger, lust, pride, arrogance, ignorance for that meditation. So in that sense it becomes a positive thing, because we're entering the meditation and we are focusing 100% on the breath, and in that process we are freeing ourselves of any anger or attachment or pride for that period of time. So it's beneficial. So bring your mental awareness or concentration within yourself and progressively let all of the thoughts in your mind just fade away, by not giving them any attention, not engaging with them. You let them subside and just go away. And then from a place of no thought, turn your attention onto the breath. The mere awareness of coming and going of the breath. Just the sort of sense, the mental sense of the breath coming in, going out. And let's focus on that for just a few minutes. And just relax your concentration a little bit and reflect on what happened in your meditation. And then with a strong determination, we'll just repeat the same meditation, but have a strong determination to keep your focus 100% on the breath. So you can relax your concentration a little bit. And now visualize in front of you somebody for whom you have deep affection. You know, think of a person from your life, somebody that you know, for whom you have really deep affection and care and concern. Imagine them just sitting in front of you, facing you, maybe just 1 or 2 meters away, but right in front of you. And, you generate that warm, affectionate mind towards them. And then thinking about maybe some circumstances, some happiness, either a physical happiness or a mental happiness that they lack, that they don't possess, that it would be beneficial for them to possess that happiness. And thinking about that, and then thinking about generating from your side a wish that they have that happiness, that circumstance, that object, a house, a car, a clothing, whatever, something, a position, something that you believe would make them happy. And similarly, looking at them and seeing that they have some suffering, some unsatisfactory condition, some unsatisfactory experience. Maybe their future is not too rosy. There's some problems looming. And so generating the wish that they be free of that suffering, of that unsatisfactoriness. And so contemplating those 2 aspects. And with that strong feeling, that you have this care and concern for this person. So then contemplating that care and concern and that affection is based on some sort of conditionality. Maybe the history between yourself and this person, or some connection, but there's some sort of conditionality on it. So then imagine the same love and affection for this person, but without that conditionality, So like mentally ignoring or forgetting that conditionality, but still having love and compassion for the person. So still seeing that this person is lacking happiness and they have suffering, and still generating love and compassion for them, but putting aside your self-interest. So just try to meditate on that. And then suddenly imagine that all living beings are sitting in front of you. So suddenly there's this vast ocean of living beings sitting next to your friend, all stretching off into a great distance and facing you. And seeing that everybody is lacking happiness and they are enduring suffering. And so try to generate a sort of a universal love and compassion for everybody on the same basis as what you have towards your friend. And just bring your concentration back to the room. We've got time for some discussion and questions or anything. If anybody has anything they'd like to offer or ask.
With the sort of delusion of the mind in relation to like a relationship with another being, sort of through your romantic relationship, and you have the illusion of that romance, and you obviously have the emotion and the passion and everything comes with it. When that sort of can break up, you're left with sort of a mixture of the positive and negative sort of in the mind. Is there any sort of way you can help to sort of offering advice?
Let me ask, what is the issue you are wanting to resolve?
Find clarity.
So the question is about a relationship, and that in the relationship there's a lot of different feelings: lust, desire, affection. And then if the relationship ends, the question is about how to resolve those that different feelings. Is that what you're asking?
Part of something that was in the past is that doesn't
So what's the question though? Like, what is your question?
to work out specific, like how you're talking about how you get these the delusion in the mind, that sort of the aspects of the mind are created in a sense through the attachment to another being. So I suppose I'm just trying to understand how I can release the sense of attachment so that it is just a true emotion.
Yeah. All of our perceptions of other people are subject to my own coloration, or the contaminating of that perception. So the beauty that we perceive, and then the lust that comes from that thing, and my role in a sort of a controlling or possessing aspect of that, sexuality in particular, the self-interest is dominant. So, that perception of beauty and the generation of lust, and then the generation of the wish to possess and the control, all those different aspects. That's one aspect. Then, but also the interaction of the person as a companion, and the communication, and that, like over a period of time, there's a whole lot of different things have happened, and different, some good, some not so good. So I know your circumstances, if it's the same circumstance from years ago. Look, it's a big question to resolve my own role in that circumstance, and but one way to look at this is that this is actually one of the characteristics of cyclic existence, or what they call samsara. This is one of the described as a suffering, that wherever there is meeting, there is separation, And so, look, possibly the acceptance of the separation is all that is required, possibly. And that any raking over of the coals, trying to understand this, understand that, is possibly unproductive. But also I think the understanding that all of the different emotions that you generate over a long period of time and the different circumstances and the other person, I'm not sure if there's a lot of benefit in, other than accepting that my own delusions have played out, and that there's a meeting, there's a meeting, a togetherness, and a separation. And beyond that, the benefit of thinking too much about it is probably fairly small. But so if your question is how do you work the dependent arising into it, well, it's again cause and effect. So somehow or other we've created the cause for that circumstance, and then similarly the ending of that circumstance. But to a large degree, this is just a characteristic of, not only that situation, but the mere birth and death is the absolute sort of separation that we will experience with everybody. Like that, the impermanence, the aging. I was looking this up before I came in tonight. If you're looking for a good reference book for a lot of these things, the Tibetan Tradition of Mental Development by Geshe Nawandagi. It's been around for a long time, this book, but it's one of the first books that I ever bought, and I still use it as a reference book. And it's fairly concise, and it tackles a lot of things. But just talking about the reality of our experience is this: wherever there is meeting, there is separation. The reality of birth, aging, sickness, and death. So I think we can actually see a lot of the interpersonal problems that we have are just the mere play of being trapped in cyclic existence and being subject to our negative emotions at play in our relationships with others, and our perceptions, they are at play. And so from a worldly point of view, to try to understand it too deeply, I'm starting to think that it's not very productive, that you can go to a psychiatrist or somebody and spend years talking about it, but maybe in the end you just realise this is the suffering of cyclic existence, and it has played out once more. And so we need to go beyond that and start looking for solution. But anyway, that's sort of just off the top of my head and a bit of a personal opinion, not based on any true knowledge, but yeah. So how have you reacted to this question about the table? Does anybody like to offer their thoughts?
Damien, I love it in the way that it just reminds me of like the Matrix movies, just thinking outside of the contracts that we live in, or the cultural contracts, or like, I guess you're told this is what that is, so you think this is what that is. And then often I think also, like, I lived most of my life with the blinkers on, and a very narrow perspective on everything, and I definitely thought in absolutes around everything. Not only like who I am, but what I'm about. So I like the concept. I like the thought that to actually analyse, and also it taps into. I think I practiced gratitude for a long time before I got into Buddhism, and I wondered one day I realised I'm just practicing this gratitude, and I like pondered upon the items around me, and I'm like, I'm grateful for that, and then I'm like, I'm grateful for who made that, and then I started just thinking about the person that made that, and then how they got that, and all the ways that it came to fruition. And I'm like, oh man, like there was a lot of effort just to go into this, my pants or whatever. And I didn't realise it at the time, but I was tapping into quite a lot of Buddhist stuff without realising. So, broad strokes, it's cool.
Yeah. I'm almost offended that you compared it to the Matrix. But this is a reality, you know, like it is a reality. But it's how do we work with it is a really big question. And the other point you're making there is understanding cause and effect. So the way we perceive something, like if we think about the cause and effect of this table, we have a very limited view of its cause and effect. But it's said that when the Buddha perceives an object, that the Buddha has a complete view of the cause and effect of every component, every aspect of the production of this table, like where the wood came from, who planted the tree, who cut it down, who processed it. You know, that there's some sort of knowledge of everything in relation to that phenomena. You know, we can make it up to some degree, but that knowledge is somewhere available, you know, and it's said that the Buddha does understand that in regard to phenomena and in regard to us, why I am in this situation. Like why I am in this situation to me is a complete mystery, you know, in this body, in this country, with these skills, with this environment, you know, to me it's a complete mystery. But there is a cause and effect for every aspect of my life, for every aspect of my body, for every aspect of the way I think and the way I act. There is a play of cause and effect in process for everything there. But I do not have the wisdom to see that. Right. So that's, you know, part of that dependent arising of cause and effect is to sort of understand that if you have a disposition towards lying, or a disposition towards pride, or a disposition towards lustful attachment, that you understand that that's the consequence of your past actions. And so if your preponderance to lustful, desirous attachment and pursuing that is a factor in your life, then you can expect to suffer the consequences of that. You know, if you actually see that within yourself, then you can expect to suffer the consequences. And like the example that I used a couple of weeks ago about somebody who's deeply habituated to lying, and so in the past they have created the karma of lying, or the action of lying. And so in this life, as a human, they then experience an habituation to lie extensively. So we have that which is called the result similar to the cause in terms of the habituation. And then there is a result similar to the cause in terms of the experience. And so what that means is that when that person speaks, others don't believe them. You know, and furthermore, they experience being deceived all the time. You know, their circumstance becomes one where they find that they are deceived extensively. But I think the one that always sort of makes sense to me is that that experience of saying the truth and people not believing you. You know, like you think, what's that all about? And so cause and effect can explain some of these things, you know. But, yeah.
I'm just curious about the idea of, I guess, being attracted or attached to one person versus being attracted or attached to multiple people, and where that lies in Buddha's beliefs.
Yeah, so it's about attachment. Well, look, I would say Buddhism does not believe in a soulmate. That is my one thing I think we could say. But we do have karmic connections with people, and so we can be drawn to somebody on the basis of some fairly hidden thing. But the reality is, with a desirous, lustful mind, there is no end to your objects of lust. Right? No end. You know. So that's another thing to consider. And then if you consider my actions based on that endless lustful thinking towards others, what is the consequence of that? Well, that's something to check as to how beneficial that is in your life.
So is that more of a multitude of effects?
Well, it's just something to examine. I'm not saying right or wrong or anything here, but the reality is that we have everybody has got. This is called the desire realm. You know, from a Buddhist point of view, the circumstance that humans are in, animals, insects, everything, all these creatures, even ghosts and whatever, this circumstance that we're in is called the desire realm, where we have a propensity to love our sensory inputs, you know. So sounds, tastes, touch, smells, bodily sensations, we love them and we want to engage in them, and so it's called the desire realm. But because of that wish to engage in all of that sensory stuff, we suffer the consequences of that. So then if you start talking about sexual attraction and things, there is no end to the amount of sexual attraction you can have to an infinite number of people. Like, you can imagine things endlessly and generate sexual desire. So you just have to examine, you know, the consequences of that. What is the consequence of that? That's only the beginning of the answer. So then, but you know, a couple of things. My understanding of this story is that somebody asked the Buddha, you know, should I marry? Should I get married? And the Buddha said, it's beneficial to have a good relationship with somebody, but to sort of have the thought that I want to be with this person for not just one life. You know, like to have a devotion or a wish for a relationship beyond just one life. You know, like if you sort of say, I'm going to have a relationship with this person and benefit them, you know, like you convince yourself that you're going to be of benefit to this person and they're going to be of benefit to you, then the Buddha's advice was, well, to have that aspiration, but not just for one life, to have that thought over a long period of time. That's one thing. And another thing is Lama Tsongkhapa, who's this statue on this side of the altar. He said that the ingredients for a successful relationship, that the two people must have a love for each other in the way that a mother loves a son, right? Which, if you think about it, is a unique type of love, completely forgiving, accepting, my son, the serial killer, I love him, like that. That's the sort of boundless love that a mother has for their son, And then they must love each other in the way that a son loves a mother. Maybe some sort of adoration or some sort of total devotion and respect or something like that, So they're different. If you think about it, the love that a mother has for a son and the love that a son has for a mother are different. And then they must love each other as brother and sister, with that companionship thing. And the fourth thing is they must share a common goal. And I think the reality is, in most relationships, people do not share a common goal, and that becomes problematic. I could say there's more, but yeah. Okay, so let's do a little dedication meditation. So imagine that over the last 5 weeks and tonight, that it's a very unique thing for people to come together and to meditate and to think about some of these topics. And certainly from my side, it's extremely beneficial for me to be able to talk to you. So something quite rare and precious in that. So imagine that takes the form of a ball of white light, and bring it above your own head. So the merit of everybody in the room, you bring that to yourself and let it dissolve down into you, completely filling your body with light. And then imagine to all of those people that are close to you who lack happiness and have suffering. So you can visualize other people, and you see that they lack happiness and they have suffering. And then imagine that the light rays, every pore of your body radiates out light rays that benefits others. To a massive, countless number of beings. Then imagine that light dissolves back into you. So thank you very much for coming. And next week, Judy Main will be here to talk Monday nights. So she's doing next month's Monday nights. And there's hopefully some cake and tea and coffee and that up in the dining room if you're able to stay and have a chat. It'll be good.